I don't even know where to start. It feels like my chest is caving in, and some days I can barely get out of bed. We had one of our twins miscarry last month. It was sudden and painful, and I thought I'd at least have my husband to lean on to grieve with. Instead, I got my mother-in-law. The moment she found out, she didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask if I needed space or help. She said I was overreacting, that therapy was a waste of time, and that I should just be grateful that at least one of my babies survived. She said it like it was a lecture in the middle of a family brunch, like I was being dramatic over something that happens all the time. I froze. I didn't even know what to say. My husband D sat there silently, not because he agreed with her, but because he's always been terrible at confronting his mom. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell her she had no right to speak about my grief like it was a minor inconvenience. But I stayed quiet, nodded, said that yes, I was grateful, hoping she'd go away. She didn't. She started talking about her daughter, my sister-in-law, who had struggled to have a child for years. She said that at least my one surviving baby was better than nothing, and that I should stop making things about me. I remember she leaned in, smiling smugly, saying I should take a page from her daughter's book. Her daughter had suffered and still didn't complain. She didn't cry to therapists. She just did what she had to. I want to tell her she had no idea what I'd been through, that no one could quantify grief, that miscarriages weren't a competition, but I didn't. Instead, I excused myself to the nursery, sat with a surviving twin, and let the tears fall quietly. For a few days, I tried to pretend it hadn't happened, tried to maintain normalcy. I went to therapy anyway because I needed it, even if she thought it was pointless. I spoke about my feelings, about the loss, about the guilt and the fear that came with raising only one of my twins. And then came the blow. I found out she had been talking to my sister-in-law behind my back. Apparently, she'd framed my decision to seek therapy as a weakness. And now sister-in-law was considering cutting her off. She told my mother-in-law that she couldn't tolerate being around someone who had been so dismissive of her sister-in-law's pain. That hurt my mother-in-law more than anything, and now she's furious. She came over last week, stormed into my living room, and demanded to know why her daughter was treating her like she was some villain. She said it was my fault that sister-in-law was acting like this, that my choice to go to therapy had turned her daughter into me, making her see the world as cold and unforgiving instead of grateful and obedient. I just stared at her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her I didn't control my sister-in-law's actions, that she had every right to set her own boundaries with people who hurt her. I reminded her that she has spent years belittling and manipulating her own daughter, and maybe that had something to do with why she was finally standing up for herself. She gasped, offended, and said I was being cruel, that I was ungrateful, and that if I had been a better wife, better mother, maybe she wouldn't have to feel this way. I told her her feelings were her problem, not mine. And then I did something I never thought I would. I told her she could no longer involve herself in my children's lives, dead or alive, if she couldn't show basic respect. Her face went pale and then red. She sputtered that she was their grandmother, that she had rights, that she had been there for D all his life. I told her she had no right to manipulate my children's lives because of her own bruised ego, and that if she wanted to be part of their world, she needed to act like an adult and apologize for how she had treated me. She tried to bargain, saying she'd try to be better, or maybe things could be fixed if I just gave her a chance. I shook my head. I told her this wasn't a chance situation anymore. She either respected us, our grief, our children, or she stayed out. Period. I had one other child before this pregnancy. Dee sat quietly through all of this, and later he told me he wished he'd said something in the moment. But he also said he was proud I had drawn a line. We agreed that moving forward, mother-in-law would not be allowed to manipulate or guilt either of us, and that sister-in-law's choices were entirely her own. It's been a week since that confrontation. She hasn't come around, hasn't called, hasn't tried to apologize, and honestly, I feel a strange relief. For the first time, I realized that protecting myself and my children is more important than maintaining a relationship with someone who refuses to understand basic human decency. I know this will cause waves in the family. People will take sides. Dee will probably get caught in the middle, but I also know I can't let someone like her dictate the emotional environment of my home or my children's upbringing. I can't let guilt or fear control me anymore. I'm in therapy again this week, just to cope with the stress, the anger, the grief. It's helping. I'm learning that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. And as much as I hate that it's come to this, I know sister-in-law is right to cut her off if she can't handle her mother's behavior. I've been trying to remind myself that this isn't about revenge or spite. This is about safety, respect, and emotional health. It's about teaching my surviving twin that boundaries matter, that love should feel supportive, not manipulative or conditional. I know my mother-in-law will try to push back. She'll probably say I'm overreacting or that I'm turning Dee against her. I don't care. I'm done being silent, done pretending that dismissing grief is acceptable, done letting her control the narrative. At the moment, I feel exhausted but strangely empowered. The loss of my twin was devastating, but this confrontation, drawing this line, has given me a sense of agency I haven't had in years. I'm finally standing up for myself, my children, and for sister-in-law, who doesn't need to put up with her mother's toxic behavior anymore. I don't know what the future will hold with mother-in-law. She may try to manipulate, guilt, or bargain her way back into our lives. But I know this. There will be no compromise on basic decency. And if that means she loses access to all her grandchildren, then that's a consequence she chose for herself. I just hope one day she understands that love isn't about entitlement, it's about respect. And if she can't, well, then she'll have to live with the decisions she made. Update 1. It's been about 2 weeks since I told mother-in-law she wasn't allowed to manipulate my kids or our lives anymore. She hasn't come over, but the storm hasn't passed. She called Dee the other night trying the guilt route. She said she was just worried about the babies and that I was being harsh, making everything about myself. Dee stayed calm on the phone and told her we appreciated her concern, but the rules hadn't changed. If she couldn't be respectful, she wouldn't be involved. The next day she tried another tactic. She texted me long paragraphs about how she was hurt and unfairly judged, how she just wanted to support me after the miscarriage. I read the texts once, took screenshots and didn't respond. Then she called my sister-in-law. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know she tried to twist things, blame me for turning her daughter against her. Sister-in-law called me later, her voice tight but firm. She said she was done being dragged into mother-in-law's games, that she wouldn't speak to her mother until she could behave like an adult. She sounded nervous at first, like she was worried about family blowback. But the tone hardened when she added that she wouldn't let her mother hurt anyone else with manipulative guilt trips. I told her I agreed completely. I said she didn't owe mother-in-law anything, and that standing up for herself was the right choice. She laughed a little, nervously, and said she hadn't expected anyone to back her up. I reminded her she always had me, and that my children and I weren't going to be casualties of her mother's ego. Mother-in-law tried another approach last weekend. She showed up unannounced at our house, holding a small gift bag, looking all sweet and concerned. I didn't answer the door. Dee went to the window and told her she wasn't welcome, that she needed to respect the boundaries we had set. She pounded on the door for a few seconds, called my name, and then finally left. Later I found out she had called neighbors, trying to find out if we were home, what we were doing, and if I'd been ignoring her. I laughed. And Dee said I should probably stop thinking about it, but it wasn't funny. She had crossed so many lines, trying to guilt and control, and it wasn't going to stop unless we stayed firm. The children noticed something too. Whenever she's around, they pick up tension like radar. Since we drew the boundary, they've been calmer, more relaxed, like the house finally feels safe. I didn't realize how much stress had been lingering until it lifted. Mother-in-law's attempts at reconciliation have been half-hearted and performative. Last night she texted again, saying she hoped we could talk. She didn't want a rift in the family and that maybe someday we'd understand her perspective. I didn't respond. Dee told me I didn't have to, that she'd only use it as an opening to manipulate. The real drama came when a family brunch was planned last weekend. She wasn't invited, obviously, but she called everyone, trying to pressure them into asking us to include her. My aunt and uncle refused, saying they understood the situation and that boundaries were important. Mother-in-law was furious, saying we were splitting the family over a miscarriage and therapy. I felt insulted over that one. Dee and I went to brunch with sister-in-law, who looked nervous at first, worried mother-in-law might try something. I reassured her that she didn't have to deal with mother-in-law if she didn't want to. She smiled, thanked me, and we all stayed close to each other, keeping an eye on our phones in case mother-in-law tried to contact anyone. During brunch, someone asked sister-in-law if she was going to reconcile with her mom. She shook her head, said not until mother-in-law admitted how wrong she'd been, and showed she could behave respectfully. I nodded, agreeing, and mother-in-law's calls and texts weren't mentioned because we didn't answer and we weren't letting her control the conversation. A few hours later, mother-in-law called Dee again. This time she cried, said no one loved her, that we were all against her. Dee stayed calm and repeated the same message. She needed to respect boundaries or have none of us in her life. She tried bargaining, offering to come over, promising to behave, and Dee said we would see, but only if she was ready to actually respect us. I think that was the turning point. She realized none of her usual tricks, guilt, crying, or sweet words would work. We didn't flinch. We didn't argue. We didn't beg her to behave. We just let her be. That night I sat with the children, feeding them and rocking them to sleep, and I realized something. Protecting myself and them wasn't selfish. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Mother-in-law had tried to convince me that therapy, grief, and boundaries were weaknesses. She had tried to pit sister-in-law and me against each other, but we didn't fall for it. We stayed together. We stayed calm. Sister-in-law called later that night. She said she felt free, like she could breathe for the first time in months. She thanked me again for standing with her, said that she finally understood that being firm wasn't being cruel, it was being safe. I told her she didn't need my approval to protect herself. She laughed, and we promised to check in more often, no matter what mother-in-law tried next. I know the next confrontation will come. Mother-in-law won't disappear quietly. She'll try new tactics, new guilt trips, maybe even manipulation through other family members. I feel like I can handle it. Dee and I are on the same page. Sister-in-law is strong, and our children are safe. I think the hardest part has been explaining this to other family members. Some ask if we're overreacting, if mother-in-law really meant harm. I just tell them the truth. We're protecting ourselves and the kids, that's it. Nothing more. No one wants to admit mother-in-law has always had a manipulative streak, and I don't blame them. But I also don't care if they understand. I care that my kids and I are safe. I never thought saying no and drawing a line and staying firm could feel this empowering. Miscarriage, grief, and mother-in-law's toxicity could have broken me, but instead, it taught me who matters, who deserves respect, and that boundaries aren't negotiable. 2 weeks in, and I finally feel some relief. Update 2. It's been about a month since I drew the line with mother-in-law. At first I thought ignoring her calls and texts would be enough, but she's persistent. Last weekend she showed up at our doorstep again unannounced, holding a gift bag and trying that sweet, concerned grandmother act. I didn't answer. Dee went to the window, told her she wasn't welcome, and she started pounding on the door. I felt my blood boil, but I stayed calm. Dee's hand found mine under the table, and I could feel his tension. This time, though, he didn't just stay calm, he snapped. He opened the door a crack and said that if she didn't leave immediately, he'd call the police. She gasped, eyes wide, tried to cry, saying she just wanted to see her grandchildren. Dee cut her off, voice sharp, telling her she had lost the privilege of seeing them until she learned basic respect, and that guilt trips and manipulation were no longer acceptable. She stepped back, muttering that we were cruel, that we were ruining family bonds. Dee didn't back down. He told her the only person ruining anything was her, that she had spent years belittling me, ignoring her daughter, and now trying to control everyone else's lives. He made it clear she was choosing this path, not us. After she left, we locked the door and checked on the children. They didn't understand the confrontation, of course, but I could see the tension leave my husband's shoulders. He had been holding back for months, trying to stay patient and polite. But this was the first time he let himself actually confront her. Later that night, I got a text from sister-in-law. She said mother-in-law had called her in tears, blaming me for turning her daughter into someone she couldn't control. Sister-in-law laughed, though softly, saying she wasn't worried. She said it's about time mother-in-law faced the consequences of her actions, and that she had no intention of letting her mother back in until she could behave. Next few days were tense. Mother-in-law tried to manipulate mutual friends, claiming she was being cut out unfairly and painting herself as the victim. But everyone could see through it. Some even told me privately that mother-in-law had been difficult for years, and they admired that we were finally standing up. Dee and I talked at length about what would happen if she escalated further. We agreed that no matter what she tried, calls, messages, passive-aggressive family gatherings, her access to the children would be entirely dependent on her attitude. And if she couldn't meet the standard, she would be completely cut off. Last night was the breaking point. Mother-in-law called again, demanding to see her grandchildren, insisting it was cruel to deny her. Dee answered, and I could hear his voice shaking, not with fear, but with anger. He told her in no uncertain terms that she had made her choice. She had treated me with cruelty, dismissed my grief, and tried to manipulate sister-in-law. Because of that, she had no right to involve herself in our children's lives until she could behave appropriately. Mother-in-law's voice rose, and she accused us of being ungrateful, unfeeling, selfish. Dee snapped, yelling that she had no right to speak to him or me, and that she wasn't entitled to our family's love or access. He told her she had pushed everyone away with her manipulation and that any attempt to guilt us would fail. He said that if she continued, she would have no access to the children ever again. She was quiet for a moment, stunned. Then she screamed something about family bonds being broken forever. Dee told her calmly, with ice in his voice, that she had already broken them herself, and that it was her actions, not ours, that caused this rift. After he hung up, we both sank onto the couch, exhausted. He told me he was proud I had stood firm, proud sister-in-law was protecting herself, and that we had finally drawn the line for good. We spent the evening talking through the rules. No uninvited visits, no calls without prior consent, no manipulation, no guilt trips. Any violation would mean permanent loss of access. The children, of course, were blissfully unaware, but we felt the relief of creating a safe, consistent environment for them. Later, sister-in-law texted again. She said mother-in-law had called her crying and begging for a meeting, claiming she'd changed, that she realized she had been wrong. Sister-in-law responded firmly that words weren't enough, that actions mattered, and that she wouldn't risk her own well-being or ours for empty apologies. Dee and I agreed that this was the final warning. We both knew mother-in-law wouldn't take it well, but we were ready. We'd already had enough of her selfishness, manipulation, and toxicity. She had pushed too far for too long. This morning, mother-in-law sent a long message trying to guilt me into paying for her niece's upcoming college tuition, saying she couldn't afford to do it all alone and that it would show I still cared about family. I didn't respond. Dee told her bluntly that she had no access to any financial support from us, that the children and I were off limits for manipulation, and that her niece's education was her own responsibility. I could hear her gasp over the phone and then sputtering about fairness and family duty. Dee didn't flinch. He told her that if she continued to interfere, she'd be completely cut out of all our lives permanently. No negotiations, no exceptions. I sat with the children, feeding them breakfast, feeling calmer than I had in months. For the first time, I felt like the protector I needed to be. Dee's anger had finally put mother-in-law in her place. This was about safety. We've blocked her from calling or texting without consent. We've warned extended family not to involve her. Mother-in-law is furious, of course. She's going to try again, maybe through indirect channels, but she has no leverage left. I don't know if she'll ever understand why we're doing this, but I do know this. My children will grow up in a home free of manipulation, guilt, and disrespect. Sister-in-law won't have to endure her mother's controlling behavior anymore. And Dee finally feels like he can protect his family without holding back. It feels like the balance has shifted. We're not reacting anymore. Update 3. It's been almost 2 months since Dee and I finally set hard boundaries. Mother-in-law hasn't contacted us directly, and honestly, it's been a relief. There's still occasional tension when I think about what she might be plotting, but for now, the house feels calm. The children are thriving. Dee is calmer. Sister-in-law has been leaning on us more than ever. Sister-in-law called me last week, sounding nervous but excited. She said she had something huge to tell me, but she needed to be sure it stayed between us. I listened carefully as she told me that she was pregnant. She whispered that she wanted to wait until the right time to tell everyone because, well, mother-in-law wasn't allowed in her life right now. I laughed softly, relieved that sister-in-law trusted me with this news. I told her we'd figure out the best way to celebrate privately and keep things safe. She sighed, grateful that she wouldn't have to deal with mother-in-law's interference, judgment, or the inevitable barrage of unsolicited advice. The way sister-in-law described it, she felt lighter already. For years she'd been under mother-in-law's thumb. Subtle manipulation, guilt trips, constant pressure to prioritize her mother's expectations over her own life. Now, for the first time, she could plan her pregnancy and think about her own child without the looming presence. Dee chimed in during the conversation, joking that mother-in-law would have a fit if she ever found out. Sister-in-law laughed, and I reminded her that mother-in-law wasn't going to find out, not unless she learned the hard way, and even then we weren't letting her anywhere near our plans. Over the next few days we kept our routines. Mother-in-law tried the occasional passive-aggressive text to extended family asking if anyone had seen the children, but none of it reached us. Dee blocked everything. I let sister-in-law know she could call or text at any time. She mentioned feeling like she could finally breathe, planning the pregnancy on her own terms without fear of manipulation. Mother-in-law's absence has been strange. Normally her voice or presence would hover over every family decision. Now, without her input, there's quiet. Dee and I even joked about how peaceful it was, how much less stress-filled life had become. A week later, mother-in-law tried again, or at least I found out through a cousin who hadn't realized the full extent of the cutoff. She had called, demanding updates on the children, asking about schooling, play dates, claiming she was concerned because she hadn't heard anything. My cousin told her politely that the children were thriving and that mother-in-law needed to respect our boundaries. She hung up in frustration, and I silently smiled, knowing our line was holding strong. Sister-in-law and I spent an evening talking through her pregnancy plans. She asked about prenatal classes, doctors, nursery setups, and I offered advice, sharing experiences from my own children. She asked if we should tell Dee when she scheduled appointments, and I laughed, saying of course. He was already thrilled. Her husband travels a lot, so he may not be able to go with her to every appointment. One night, mother-in-law attempted an indirect approach. She texted a mutual family member, asking if anyone knew how sister-in-law was doing, implying that she should be included in any pregnancy announcement. That person, who had been wary of mother-in-law for years, forwarded the message to me. I sent a quick note. Everything was fine. Sister-in-law's privacy needed to be respected, and mother-in-law was not to be informed or involved. She was guessing. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For so long, mother-in-law had dictated what everyone could or couldn't do, who could be informed and who could make choices. Now she had no control. Every time she tried, she was blocked, ignored, or firmly told no, and it worked. Sister-in-law told me she was planning a small announcement to her closest friends, and she wanted to wait a few more months before telling anyone else, including her mother, which was a maybe. I reminded her this was her right, her choice, and no one could take that from her. She smiled, a mixture of relief and happiness, and I felt proud of how far we'd all come. Dee checked in later that night, asking if I wanted to tell the children about their future cousin too. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. Let's wait until everything is settled. We want this to be joyful and safe, without any unnecessary tension creeping in. Dee agreed, and we laughed a little, imagining the children's reactions when the news finally drops. It hasn't been easy. There are moments when I wonder if mother-in-law will ever stop, if she'll escalate again. Sometimes I still imagine her reaction if she knew about sister-in-law's pregnancy. She'd be furious, probably outraged that she had no control over the news, but that's not my problem anymore. Her influence ended months ago, and it's staying that way. As I sit here watching my child play with toys on the living room floor, I realize something important. Update 4. Sister-in-law had made her decision early. Mother-in-law wasn't going to know about the pregnancy. She wanted stability, peace, and a chance to plan her life without the constant stress mother-in-law brought. When she called, her voice was low but excited, a careful mix of nerves and joy. She told me she was about 4 months along. She wanted to keep it small, controlled. Mother-in-law, she said, would only turn this beautiful moment into drama. I reassured her we'd keep it safe. We could plan the next steps, appointments, and everything else quietly. Over lunch, sister-in-law shared ideas for the nursery, showing me a folder of color swatches, and funny baby names, lists she'd been obsessively keeping. She laughed when she admitted she spent a full hour debating whether Clementine sounded too old-fashioned or cute. We argued over mint versus pale yellow paint, joking that mother-in-law would demand a neon pink room just to make a statement. The tension of secrecy added a strange thrill, like a secret club no one else could join. Meanwhile, mother-in-law had been poking around subtly, sending vague texts to cousins and friends, trying to gather news about sister-in-law. Each time sister-in-law ignored it, deleted messages, rolled her eyes. She said she'd rather have the few people she trusted know than risk mother-in-law finding out through gossip. I offered to block anyone trying to pry, and she agreed. For once, she felt empowered to control the narrative of her life. Even Dee got involved, joking about how mother-in-law would explode if she came to know after the birth. Sister-in-law laughed, grateful for the support. She said it was the first time she could plan a part of her life without feeling anxious about someone swooping in to critique or manipulate her. We mapped out a small calendar for appointments and shared it only between us, marking reminders for ultrasounds, doctor visits. Every check mark felt like a little victory, a moment of autonomy that mother-in-law could never touch. That evening, sister-in-law texted me a picture of the baby's ultrasound, her words barely containing excitement. I told her we'd make copies and hide the originals safely until she was ready to share. We didn't need mother-in-law knowing every detail, turning every announcement into a performance. This time, sister-in-law was the one in charge. By the time the children were in bed, sister-in-law and I were still chatting quietly, laughing about nursery mishaps and potential baby names. She said she felt like she could finally plan her child's life without fear. She was free to enjoy it. Keeping the pregnancy a secret wasn't easy, but sister-in-law said it was worth it. The calm, the laughter, the sense of control, it was all new, but exactly what she needed. And in that quiet, shared moment, I knew we'd protect this secret with everything we had. Mother-in-law could rage all she wanted. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.